This evening, we welcome Shelley Mangram, who's a retired U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer and Special Education teacher, and an occasional seasonal National Park Ranger. She is an archives volunteer and member of the Rancho Santa Maria and Las Flores Docents. Shelley supports Camp Pendleton's History and Museum branch as a docent. She gives guided tours of the Santa Margarita Ranch House National Historic Site, the Las Flores Adobe National Historic Landmark, and the Las Flores Estancia, California Historical Landmark, all located on Camp Pendleton. Tonight, Shelley will talk about a family of early American settlers whose name is well known in this community, the Magees. Without further ado, Shelley.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry about the late start, some technical difficulties, but I promise to make it up for you. I think it'll be worth the wait. So yes, I'm a docent. You can see the pictures, and I'm not used to the mic, so I'm going to keep it. I was told it's like you're eating ice cream. So the photos on the end are our garb when we're giving our official scheduled tours, and I'm not wearing that tonight because this is a lot more comfortable. But we give tours to the top 3 photos there. You can see on your left, the Santa Margarita Ranch House, a National Historic Site, and in the middle is the Las Flores Adobe National Historic Landmark, and that's what I'm going to be mostly focusing on this evening. And the estancia that was mentioned is now a ruins, and it's the building on the right-hand side as you look at it. And along the borders are persons over the years that are historical figures associated with Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores, and I'll be talking about the Magee family, and 3 photos are represented in the middle there. But first, let me see if this works. First slide goes to the next slide. It did not. Okay, there we go. I'm going to put that down because maybe. Okay, so where are we talking about? Where is Rancho Santa Margarita? Where is Las Flores? So if you look over here, I think I can use a pointer. Let's see. The pointer, we have Temecula and then Fallbrook. Over towards, if you go through Fallbrook, you can get on the base through the Naval Weapons Station. That's one of the entrances into Naval Weapons Station and into Camp Pendleton. So that's just giving you a geography here. If you go down to Oceanside, you can go through the main gate. If you go along I-5 here, who's been along I-5 from Oceanside to San Clemente? Raise your hand. Yeah, everybody pretty much has. And you might have noticed that sign right there, Las Pulgas Road, exit 1 mile. If you haven't seen that, you'll probably notice it next time you drive I-5. Well, when you see the Las Pulgas exit, if you have access to the base, you can go right on the base. If you don't have access, you can get off and get right back on the interstate. But that is the Las Flores area. Las Pulgas is right near Las Flores. And what is at Las Flores? Well, these are just those same images from before. We have the Las Flores Adobe Ranch House. It's a National Historic Landmark. We have the Estancia, only a ruin today. Only about 3 feet of a ruin is there, but we give tours to that area, the Las Flores area. And then if you go 10 miles inland, you'll get to the Santa Margarita Ranch House. And that was the home of the commanding general of Camp Pendleton. Came into being in 1942. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But after it became Camp Pendleton, it was the commanding general's home for 60 years. 35 different commanding generals lived in this historic building. That was built maybe as early as 1841, possibly earlier. We really don't know. But I want you to also notice co-located at those 2 sites with those Adobe ranch houses are villages. We have Ushime here, and we have Topome here, co-located with Santa Margarita. And those are Payam-Cowichan villages. Those are today, well, once Mission San Luis Rey was established, the Payam-Cowichan people were called Luiseños. So that might be what you're more familiar with, Luiseños. Today, they're divided into 7 different bands. Here in Temecula, if you're more closely associated with the Pachanga band. Well, those are Payam people. In our area of Camp Pendleton and Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores, it is the San Luis Rey Band of Mission Indians. But there are 7 different bands. Okay, so that's geography. Now today, what does it look like there? This photo is about 2 months ago. There's the ruin of the Estancia. This large edifice, this large building is now a 3-foot ruin, covered by a shelter that you've seen many Adobe ruins covered with to try to save what's left of it. And then can you see the water? Yep, there's the Pacific Ocean. There's some cars. You can't see this very well, I'm sorry, but there's cars. There's I-5 right there. And you see the rise. So this large building with the bell tower was right here. And could you see it from the ocean? Yes. So think of Richard Henry Dana's book, 2 Years Behind the Mast, going up and down the coast of California, selling goods and taking on those hides. He would have seen the Las Flores Estancia. And in the book, he does talk about seeing Mission San Juan Capistrano from his ship. You can't see Mission San Juan Capistrano from his ship. You can see Las Flores from a ship. That's probably what he saw. And that was in the 1830s. So that's what it looks like today. So who are we talking about here? So now we talk about where, who. Well, after Mexico won its independence in 1821, the missions started being, were secularization. The mission lands were being given away in the large Mexican land grants, right? And Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores was a private ownership started with Pio and Andres Pico in 1841. And so before it was Mission San Luis Rey land, those were outposts at the Estancia was an outpost. The Santa Margaritas was an outpost. Those were cattle ranches and vineyards there for the mission. But 1841, it fell under private ownership. Pio Pico is best known as the last governor of Alta California when the Americans invaded. And Andres Pico is probably best known as the general of the Californio lanced troops that fought General Stephen Watts Kearny at the Battle of San Pascual. He would later become a California State Assemblyman and a senator. And Pio Pico, maybe least known, it was the godfather of John Forster. So who is John Forster? John Forster is also probably better known as Don Juan Forster. If you're familiar with Orange County history or Mission San Juan Capistrano, you've probably heard of the Forster name. He and his wife, Isadora Pico Forster, the sister of Andre and Pio, were married. He's an Englishman. He came to Mexico at 16 years old in the 1832, 1833, and he would find his way to Alta California, become a Mexican citizen, convert to Catholicism, and marry their sister Isadora. They would have about 6 children, and they lived in Mission San Juan Capistrano. They lived there for almost 20 years, raised their kids. In 1864, they obtained Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores from their brother-in-law. And they moved in. They're the ones that built Las Flores Adobe. So Las Flores Adobe didn't exist until the Foresters gave some land to their oldest son, and he built the Las Flores Adobe Ranch House, and that was in 1867. The next, I gotta make sure I click that. The next owner was Richard O'Neill. Richard O'Neill is important as not only as the last private owner of Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores, but he's the one that brings the Magees into the story. So now we're going to talk about the Magees. Richard Magee offered the orphaned Magee children the uninhabited Rancho, I'm losing my words here, the Las Flores Adobe. It had been uninhabited for about 3 or 4 years. Their mother passed away. That is the reason he offered it to them. And their mother previously had warned the O'Neills of a cattle rustling or maybe some other bad acts upon their family. And so she saved them from that. They were able to prevent that. So Richard O'Neill saw it as an opportunity to repay them. So when their mother passed away, and who I'll talk about in just a minute, when she passed away in 1886, he offered them to move into the Las Flores Adobe Ranch house. And what they did move there. Have you guys heard of Condor's Nest in the Paula area? Okay, Condor's Nest is where they were living. They had the ranch. They bought Condor's Nest in about 1881. And when their mother passed away in 1886, and this was offered to them, they took their all their ranch implements, almost everything, down to Las Flores, and they started a dairy farm. And they had chickens and cows and pigs. And but what they found was very profitable for them were lima beans, because they're right on the coast. Lima beans, the early 1900s, that was the perfect place to grow lima beans. And she became known as Southern California's lima bean queen. So that's Jane Magee. So when you think of Las Flores, the Magees of Las Flores, you should picture her face, that beautiful photo right there, and think of Jane Magee. She was the oldest of 10 kids that her mother and father had together. This bag here is from another lima bean farmer on Rancho Santa Margarita. It is from Archibald Haven, and he lived in the San Onofre area. The train came right through there, and that's his lima bean bag. So lima beans were grown from Santa Barbara all the way down here. It was the perfect crop, summer crop. All it needed was the winter rains for the ground, and then the fog. What is it, May gray and June gloom, and you're on the coast. That's all you needed, and it grows as soon as you plant it. In a week or two, it's growing. You by the September, October, you're harvesting it. All you got to do is let it dry now. So she became the queen of well known for her lima bean production. So let's talk about her family now. So Magee, you guys probably recognize him. This picture is very common for John Magee, Judge John Magee. He had the first store right here in Temecula for the post office. First post office was established there. The Butterfield Stagecoach stop at his store. So he was an early pioneer here, but he was not the first in California of the Magees. The Magees are from New York, originally from Ireland, and the first to come was Henry Magee, Jane's father. He came with the New York Volunteers. He arrived in San Francisco in 1847, in March of 1847. Well, the Treaty of Cahuenga, fighting in California, ended in January. So he didn't fight. In fact, the New York Volunteers didn't really come as fighters. President Polk authorized that regiment to be formed to be colonists. So they came to be colonists. They were single, able-bodied men with some type of trade and skill. And so the New York Volunteers didn't really come as soldiers. Half of them went to Monterey. The other half went to La Paz, Baja California. And some of those did do some fighting. But Henry came, and yes, he did settle. So he arrived in 1847. He came down to San Diego. After 2 years in California, he was mustered out. His unit was mustered out. That's where he met Victoria de Pedrorena, and that is Jane's mother, Victoria de Pedrorena. Now, the name Amelia Magee Resch, or Retchie, you guys familiar with the Retch name? Retchie, a lot of people pronounce it differently. Yeah, Fallbrook founders, right? The first settlers of Fallbrook, that's who they are. Amelia Magee Resch, that's their sister. And she married Vital Resch. These three guys met in 1851 in San Francisco. They were all up there to do the gold mining. And by 1860, they're married. They're living in Temecula. He's already in Temecula. And the 1860 census has them all living under one household here in Temecula. So they would live in Temecula during most of the 1860s, except these, Amelia and Vital did return to New York in the middle of the 1860s. But as far as I can tell, Henry and Victoria, John Magee, Amelia, and Vital Resch all lived under one roof in 1860 for some time into the 1860s. And this is where Jane was born. They started their family here in Temecula. They had their first child, Jane, here in Temecula. And I believe that we know where they lived. I don't know if we had any idea before. There's a letter that's been transcribed by one of their sons. You know where Malon Vale's home is, Casa Loma, I think is what it's called. Well, he has a letter that he wrote. It's been transcribed, and he says they lived all together there where Malon Vale or Mall Vale, that's what he called him, lived at that time in the early 1900s. So they probably lived over on the hill there in that area. A little bit more about Pedrorena now, Victoria Pedrorena. Her father was Miguel de Pedrorena. He was a Spanish man who was Oxford educated, came through Peru to Alta California. He arrived pretty late in 1838, as far as other Californios go. He would be a big supporter of the Americans that came through. He supported Newtown, San Diego, the first Newtown. They call it Davis's Folly, the one that did not succeed in 1850. He put up money. He bought lots in Newtown. And Victoria would inherit all this, those lots in Newtown. And that mattered for them later on. So Maria Antonia Studio, she received Rancho El Cajon. And this is where Victoria grew up in her grandparents' home, though, Casa de Estudio. So Ramona's marriage, where she was married, right, Ramona? That's Casa de Estudio, built by Maria Antonia's father and mother, has Jose Antonio Estudio and Maria Victoria Dominguez de Estudio. His father was Jose Maria Estudio, Commandant of San Diego Presidio. So her lineage there is quite old in the California families. And this is who Henry married, and they would have 10 kids together. Okay. Now let's talk about the kids. Let's get into the family, the Magee kids. So I'm going to leave Victoria de Pedrorena and Henry Magee, and you can see their siblings up there. There were actually 7. Henry, Amelia, and John had 4 other siblings. They stayed in the New York area. Victoria had 3 other siblings. But you can see that they had 10 kids together, and you see Jane on the far end there. She would live at Las Flores. She went in 1889, and she would live there for the next 56 years. Las Flores would be her home. The Lima Bean Queen, she made that her home. Louisa is an adopted child. She's actually John Magee's daughter. John Magee, it's the same year that Jane was born, Louisa was born. So John fathered quite a few children. His first wife was a Cahuila woman named Feliciana, as far as I can tell. And they had Louisa, but they couldn't raise Louisa. And they asked their brother and sister-in-law if they would raise her. And they did. And they didn't just raise her, they adopted her. So she is their sister. She's their sister. They never referred to her as anything other than their sister, because she was a baby, when this happened. And she inherited everything just like everyone else did. Louisa would live at Las Flores, but she would move into the Santa Margarita Ranch house and take care of Richard O'Neill. As he was getting older, she would take care of Alice O'Neill, his wife, as she got older, and she would take care of all those grandkids that were running around, grandkids and nieces and nephews. So she lived there at Santa Margarita Ranch House. Raise your hand if you've been to the Santa Margarita Ranch House. Okay, good. Do you guys remember Isidore's bedroom at all? Isidore's bedroom, it's called Isidore's bedroom. Okay, that's fine. But now that I know more, it's Louisa's bedroom too. We know from a fact through books such as Rancho Santa Margarita Remembered. Highly recommend this if you want to know more about the family. And that's more on the O'Neill side, but they were very close. This is a great time to say how close the O'Neills and the Magees were. Very, very close. They stayed at each other's house. The grandkids, the nieces and nephews were all friends and family. And so Louisa, that was her room. So those that have visited Santa Margarita, that was where she slept. And in the book, the grandkid, he's a grown man, talking about being a little boy there in the picture here. but he talks about living, sleeping in the dungeon. And the dungeon was the bathroom. It's a bathroom today, but it was a bedroom at that time, and that was where the kids slept. And Louisa was right next door. So next time you come and visit, you'll know what that room is. Hugh Magee came with Jane to Las Flores in 1889 and started the farming, the dairy farming and all that. He would return to Condor's Nest in 1913. He married in 1912. And who's been to Oceanside and heard of a park called Magee Park? Yeah, there's Magee Park in Oceanside, but that is not a Magee home. That's a Shipley home that belonged to his wife's family, but it's called Magee Park. That didn't have really anything to do with the Magees. It's a Shipley home. And I just like to point that out. He married Florence Shipley, and they in 1913 moved back to Condor's Nest. They always kept Condor's Nest, and they would go back to it several times, some of these siblings here. Victor had a son. Am I on Victor? Did I talk about? I'm on Hugh. I'm sorry. So many kids. So Hugh went back in 1913 to Condor's Nest. Victor, he and his the sister next to him, Maria Antonia, they resided when they became older in the Fallbrook area. Victor would marry a Fallbrook woman named Ora, and she gave a lot of good oral history that we know a lot of them now. He farmed with his brother-in-law, Maria Antonia's husband, Percy Johnson, a lot of farm. They'd lease farmland and farm it. And they actually leased 4,000 acres on the Santa Margarita, where Lake O'Neill is on Camp Pendleton, all the way to Fallbrook. They farmed that. And they lived where Naval Weapons Station is today, where the buildings are. That's where their house was. Ora talks about in her 1950s oral history passed down that they planted a palm tree there, and right there. And so I went the other day trying to find a big giant, palm tree, and I think I may have seen them. So they had a son. They had 3 sons, but one of their sons was a World War II vet and a Korean War vet and a Korean War POW, who was released in 1953. And I just like to mention that because that's their history. At that time they lived in Oceanside. At this time they lived in Oceanside. I already talked about Maria. Her husband was worked with Percy Johnson, worked with Victor, but Maria started the Fallbrook Women's Club, was one of the founders of the Fallbrook Women's Club in Fallbrook. Anita is important to talk about because she and her brother Henry, Anita's right here, and Henry I don't have a photo of yet, but Henry and Anita, they settled in the Sage area. So that's not too far from here. You guys know where Sage is. They bought farms in the Sage area. Anita and her husband farmed there for a while and sold it in 1911 and bought Keene Camp, a resort that's in the Strawberry Valley going towards Idlewild. They bought Keene Camp. And today it's an animal sanctuary, the actual place where they were at. But her husband died the next year at Lake Hemet trying to save a fisherman from drowning, and he drowned himself. And the Carnegie Medal Heroes Award was started about 5 years before that. So she was a recipient of that award and awarded $50 a month for the rest of her life for his efforts at trying to save another person, and lost his own life. And they had 2 daughters. And of note on Louisa Walker, their daughter, she had a daughter that's very important to mention, Betty Keller. Betty Keller saved Las Flores. So a granddaughter of Anita saved Las Flores. When the Marines took over Las Flores, which I will get to that in just a bit, they were going to demolish it. And today it's a National Historic Landmark, but they were going to demolish it. But a granddaughter created this group, the Las Flores, Friends of the Las Flores Adobe, and they saved it. And not only did they save it, they got it marked as a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest form of preservation. Henry, he lived in Sage, as I said, and farmed. He died in a farming accident. And then we're moving on to Beatrice. Beatrice is right here. She would marry a man, Charles Clifford May. You guys may know Cliff May. You ever heard of Cliff May? Architect, designer, builder. Yes, he's a well-known, renowned designer of the California. He's the father of the California ranch-style home. So when you see the California ranch style home, that's Cliff May, and that is her son. That's Beatrice's son. There's Cliff right there. They lived in San Diego predominantly. They had moved down there. Cliff May, we have a lot of his oral history. He had visited Las Flores. We know a lot about Las Flores from those descendants like Cliff May. He was so inspired by Las Flores. He's the one that brought in that indoor-outdoor living to the California ranch style home. So it's to his credit. And where did he get that from? He didn't create it, but he was born with it from growing up at Las Flores and the Santa Margarita Ranch House. This studio mansion, Casa de Estudio, those are his people, you know? Yes, yes, Cliff May, the architect. His middle name is Magee, Cliff Magee May. Yeah, that's right. And that's him right there. Billy Magee had a daughter. Billy is another, he was quite the rascal. I cannot go into all the stories. If you read that book, Rancho Santa Margarita, you'd hear more about Billy, but I won't take the time. But his daughter is important, Jane Magee Stoss. She would marry a man named Bob Stoss. She was born in Las Flores, and she would come back for years and years and years as an older woman and pass down the oral history of Las Flores, of the family, the house, Santa Margarita. Again, they were very, very close, both families of both ranch houses. So we know so much about it from those two, and from Ora, Victor's wife, Ora, her oral history that's been passed down. And then finally is Baby Louie. He when Jane retired from the Lima Bean business in 1922, he took over the business, and he would be the last resident there, he and his wife. Okay, so we're going to move on and talk about the house now, the National Historic Landmark. It was built started building in 1867 by Juan Forster and Isidora Pico Forster's oldest son, Marcos. And there he is there. He moved in 1868, and it would be exactly 100 years later that it was deemed a National Historic Landmark. And what did he build? He built a Monterey style. Can you see the two-story? And this is the south side facing the ocean. This is the north side. So you can see the two-story. It's called Monterey style, which is a Spanish style adobe home with American embellishments or American style, such as railings, balconies, fireplaces, shared flues, picket fences. That's all American. But it is part of the Monterey style, which started in Monterey. And it was very, very popular during the 1830s and 1840s and into the 1850s. But by the 1860s, it was not that popular. For them to build a Monterey style is unusual for that time. And I'm not talking about the revival of these buildings that comes later in the early 1900s. 1860, it's kind of late to build it. It wasn't popular then. And there weren't that many in Southern California, but this is one of the few. But do you see the hacienda segment? So it incorporates a hacienda segment. Here's the corridor of that hacienda segment. And you can see the third element there of another adobe section, which was called the carriage house. And it was a utility house. Laborers, servants slept there. They had their dairy in this building. And so here's their courtyard. And here's their courtyard, and they had it enclosed, at least the Magees had it enclosed, with a 10-foot cypress hedge. So that's what you're seeing right there, that's unusual. So National Historic Landmark, but what makes it a National Historic Landmark? Why isn't the Santa Margarita a National Historic Landmark? Oh, good question. That's Louis, baby Louis. That's the baby of the family. That's Louis, Jane's brother, Magee. Louis Magee, yep, that's the youngest. And this picture was taken around 1950s, some 60s, not 1950s. He passes away in 1964. So there are there are almost 100,000 sites on the National Registry of Historic Places, almost 100,000. There's a lot of them, and they deserve to be preserved, right? But there's only about 2,500 National Historic Landmarks. They're rare. So why is Las Flores a National Historic Landmark when it was built in 1867 and the Rancho Santa Margarita, the Santa Margarita Ranch House was built 1841 or maybe even earlier, because we really don't know. What's the difference? Well, I can just tell you what the Las Flores Adobe is is on the registry for. It's on the registry for its importance locally as the headquarters of a lima bean farm. So it has local importance, which matters for a national registry. It also has social history, national importance on the national social history category as a later but important example of Rancho economy and Rancho culture in the 1868 to 1888 timeframe. Those two don't make it on the that doesn't make it National Historic Landmark. What makes it National Historic Landmark is the architecture. Because there's a word I haven't used yet, but I'll use it now. It's an exceptionally good example. The word is exceptional. So when National Historic Landmarks have the word exceptional, a good example associated with them. And what's unique about the Las Flores is not just that it's Monterey style and Hacienda style, which is the traditional Spanish Mexican, but it's one unit architecturally. And it's the only one that they know of. So there's lots of Montereys, there's lots of even combinations, but they're not one structure architecturally united. And that's the difference. And that's why it's a National Historic Landmark. And that means that it has a higher level of preservation integrity. So here's another example of the difference. In the 2000s, Las Flores was seismically retrofitted. That's big. That's a lot of money. It was restored. And this is during the 2000. University of Vermont came along with the National Park Service and the environmental security from the base. And but the Santa Margarita Ranch House, it is on the National Register, but it's not a National Historic Landmark. It has not been seismically retrofitted. It has not been restored. And since 2007, commanding generals have no longer lived in that house. Therefore, it's not getting any work done. And there's been no work in that house since 2007. And because it doesn't have the same preservation integrity as a National Historic Landmark. And so I just like to point out the difference between them because we have both on the base, Okay. Okay, so where did they live? Where the Magees lives is just amazing. Some of this I've already talked about, but imagine being the Magees and living there, a future National Historic Landmark site. Look at everything that's happened. I tried to summarize this spiraling out in the middle. Already talked about Ushime, a Payam-Cowichan village for millennium before, right? Portola, the Portola expedition came through in 1769, and they camped there at Las Flores. So when I'm there, when I took that photo 2 months ago, I think every time I'm there, I think about that. I think about all these things. 1823, the Las Flores Estancia was completed. It's now a ruin, but it was completed then. 1833, when secularization happened, well, Las Flores was off the market. It wasn't a land grant. Las Flores was not available to be given away in a Mexican land grant because they made it a Pueblo Libre, a free town. So the native people that were living there got to have their own town and manage themselves and govern themselves. And there were only 4 or 5 Pueblo Libres established in Alta California by the Mexican government, and Las Flores was one of them. But during this time that they're trying to govern themselves, all this is going on. And let me tell you what's going on. The Battle of Las Flores happens, 1838. Outgoing Governor Juan Bautista Alvarado, right there, he's the current governor. He's supposed to go out of power now and be replaced by Carlos Antonio Carrillo, the incoming appointed governor. But he didn't want to leave. Alvarado didn't want to leave. So the supporters of each battled each other. And Carrillo retreated to Las Flores. They used the building as barracks, and they used the corral as a fort. They placed the cannon on there, and they shot their cannon. And it's kind of, the historians describe it as a comic opera battle because they gave up really easy. It was over really quickly. And guess who was still governor after all that? Alvarado. So he won out. But do you guys know Leo Carrillo, the ranch Leo Carrillo? Well, that's his great grandfather. Pancho of the Cisco Kid, Leo Carrillo played him. Well, doesn't that look like Pancho right there? Yes, it does. They look like each other. Look at the pictures, the photos and paintings of the Carrillo men. They look like each other. That could be Pancho right there. So this is going on in their village, in their Pueblo Libre. And what else is going on? Well, Pio and Andres Pico in 1841, they had received Rancho. I said Rancho, this is called Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores, but that's not the original land grant. The original land grant of 1841 that Pio and Andres in 1841, I know it says 1844 because I'm talking about 1841. The land grant was Rancho San Onofrio y Santa Margarita, because Las Flores was a Pueblo Libre, right? It was not on the market. But who wanted it? Who surrounded it? They did. They had San Onofre, the surfing area that we know of today, and they had the Santa Margarita, and they wanted Las Flores. And guess what? They sabotaged the Pueblo Libre until finally the native people gave up and sold it. And so when that happened in 1844, Las Flores was added to the land grant, and it was renamed Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores. So they had to give that up. And so now it's 133,000 acres of the Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores. January 3rd, 1847, after the Battle of San Pascual, the Americans have made it back to San Diego. They've recouped. They're ready to retake Los Angeles. So they're marching 600 plus Navy, Marines, Dragoons, and California volunteers are on the move with Stockton and Kearney, and they're marching to Los Angeles. And where do they camp at? Las Flores. They camp on January 3rd. In this book here, Lieutenant Emery reports, this is his diary. He was the doctor with Kearney's Dragoons, and it's a day-by-day diary. January 3rd, he's at Las Flores. They are at Las Flores. So that's incredible history. And January 13th, the Treaty of Cahuenga would be signed with Andre Pico signing it. So that happened right there. And in fact, in the background, I know this is going to be put on YouTube. I hope it is. And you guys look at that closely. That's Las Flores in the background. That painting was painted by a Marine artist, Colonel Charles Waterhouse, that painted this in 1950s. I don't know exactly when he painted it, but that's just a depiction of those forces camped at Las Flores. 1867, the ranch house, the Las Flores Adobe ranch house, is built by the foresters, and this is where they held rodeos and roundups, and so he knew that area well. That's why Marcos Forster selected Las Flores. The next year, Shelly and Wright stagecoach comes through, and it's a stop on the Shelly and Wright stagecoach line between San Diego and Los Angeles, and that comes out of the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Today is the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Old Town, San Diego, and it stops at the ranch house. The driver sleeps over, changes horses, and I know you can't see it again, but look carefully later, and maybe some of you can see it. There's a horse right there. That is the estancia. That's the estancia in the 1870s. That's a very old photo, circa 1870-ish, and that's a horse there because it was being used as stables by the Shelly and Wright Company at Las Flores. The next year, or by 1888, not the next year, but 20 years later, the Santa Fe Surf Line is up and running, and they have two stops. So the Magees have a railroad line going right past them. It's still running today. And the Las Flores Ranch House is still right there. They would have their meat every week delivered in a burlap sack from San Diego, and the train would get there to Dawn Station, slow down just enough for them to toss the beef in the bags out, and it would bump and roll down the railroad line. And then it's Cliff May who talks about it. He talks about how they'd be waiting there. They'd drive the buckboards down, and wait for the train to come at 10:30. The train would do its whistle and they'd toss off the meat, and the meat would and they'd pick up the meat and they'd take it back home. They said the best part of the meat was the bruised part. Great oral history, right? Yeah, and not only did they get their goods delivered by the train right there, but they also used it for their lima bean farm. They had a warehouse. Jane built a warehouse at Dawn Station, and it took them an hour to get to Dawn Station. They had Las Flores Station and Dawn Station on this train line. But at Dawn Station, they had a big warehouse, and that's where they stored the beans, the dried beans, until it was the best time to go to market. And then they got on the train and went to market, and that was Jane. So they really benefited from the railroad. And some of you know this as well. The Santa Margarita Ranch House had the California Southern Railroad running through the middle of the base, going to Fallbrook and here to Temecula for some time. So both those ranch houses had train support from two different lines. And in 1908, the Magees and the O'Neills witnessed the 1908 Roosevelt's Great White Fleet. They went to the bluffs of Las Flores. The O'Neills came over the night before. This was in April. All of California knew they were coming. This is 16 battleships. The hulls are painted white. It's Roosevelt's power cruise. They're going around the world on a 14-month cruise. And they come up the California coast. And everybody knew it. Everybody's at Oceanside, the beaches, watching for the ships to come. And at Las Flores, they did the same thing, but the O'Neills came the night before and spent the night at the Las Flores ranch house, all got into the buckboards and the surreys, and they went out to the bluffs of Las Flores, and they saw the smokestack. They saw the smoke coming first. Then they saw the ships hugging the coast, and then they saw, they heard the booming of the cannon giving them a salute. They heard the Navy band playing, and the sailors in their white uniforms and their caps and their covers, as we call it in the Navy, waving at them at Las Flores. I just think that's amazing history that they lived around. And then finally today, Las Flores' area is called the 41 area. That's what Camp Pendleton calls it. And the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. It's the home of the Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion. So that's where they lived. And I think it's amazing. It was dedicated as a base. We're almost done, you guys. Doing pretty good, considering. September 25th, 1942, base dedication named for General Joseph Henry Pendleton, who was a longtime proponent for a permanent Marine Corps base in the San Diego area. He was with his Marines here during the in 1914, 1916, camping on Coronado, and they had no permanent facilities. And they eventually went to Balboa Park after the expo there, and they lived in some of those buildings for a while before what today is MCRD San Diego. Recruit Depot was formed, and he was actually dedicated that base to be open. But President Roosevelt was here for the dedication ceremony. He passed away earlier that year, and that's his widow there for the presentation. And this is President Roosevelt at the Santa Margarita Ranch House in the courtyard getting presented with a laureate. And Jane was 78 years old, I believe, at this time. So this is oral history, family oral history, that he went to Las Flores. So President Roosevelt, oral history says, that's what the family says, that he went to Las Flores to the aging Jane. And this is 1942. She passes away in 1946. At 83 years old. Yeah, so she's 79 years old. And it's a base now. So you would think they have to leave. There's a lot of leasers, a lot of farmers they were leasing. The O'Neills were doing a lot of leasing then. He said that they could stay there until the last member of their family passes away. And they would stay there another 25 years. Jane would pass away in 1946, but Lewis and his wife Ruth were the last of the Magees of that generation. And Lewis passed away in 1962 or 4, I get it confused. And Ruth stays on there until 1967. She passes away in 68, but she leaves in 67. She needs to have someone lived somewhere else then. So in 1967, it reverts back to the Marines, and they want to demolish it. So I want to revert back now to Betty Keller, that granddaughter of Anita Magee, Jane's sister, who saved it. And it was going to be gone. And in 1968, it was a National Historic Landmark. That is a photo of Las Flores in 1942. Okay, let's see. And these are just some photos. I'm really done, you guys. Just some photos I do want to point out. This is 1938, probably because this looks like the same year that I know this is 1938. The dinner party of Jane Magee Stoss, who's getting married to Bob Stoss. That's Jane, who comes, remember, later as an older lady for years. We have her on video, and she was born in Las Flores. And these are pictures are at Las Flores, and that's Jane there. That's Jane. There's Louisa. And there's Beatrice, and there's Louis. And we think that's Richard O'Neill Jr., and this person's unidentified. There's Hugh at Las Flores in 1912, before he goes back to Condor's Nest. Here is Bill Magee right there at the Santa Margarita Ranch house with some other guys. One is an author, Ed Ainsworth, and his book, where did it go? I think it's under... Oh, here it is. Thought it was the one holding up the projector. Eagles Fly West. This is a novel, historical novel, but he wrote it. He was good friends with Bill, the rascal. And he made a historical novel of, I think, Henry Magee, because this is about the New York Volunteers coming around the Horn and Battle of San Pasqual. But he was not in the Battle of San Pasqual, though. So it is fictionalized. But supposedly, and I have not finished this book yet, because I kind of have a hard time with fiction now these days. But Las Flores is described in this book from what I understand. So I will be finishing it. I just have not yet. But that's the guy in the photo there with Bill at Ainsworth. He wrote several books. And then there's Cliff May with his wife at Las Flores. Just some photos to share. And we're finally at the end, and these are some of the books that I brought to show off because these are just great books. Diaries. The one here is very important. That's a French attaché to Mexico. I can't say his name. I can never remember it. But he was France said, "I want you to go." He was a scientist, an explorer, a botanist, as they all were during those days. And he went up and down the coast of California, visiting into Oregon territory and commenting on what was going on. He visited Las Flores in 1841. He talked to the Indians there, the Pueblo Libre there. That was right at the time that Pio Pico and Andres Pico, that was right. And they asked about Father Perry. Where is Father Perry? Have you seen him? That was at Las Flores. I had read about that before, but I didn't know that it was at Las Flores that they asked this person that was visiting. And they also visited the Santa Margarita. This is the year 1841. Pio Pico and Andres Pico received that land. And he talked about the vineyard that was there, the mission vineyard. He said the grapes were so good. So that's a very important book to read. Is there a question? Go ahead. Say again.
Is that the library here?
No, these are my personal books, and most of them are right here. But I'm sure the library here has.
Where is it? Where's this?
Which are you interested in? A certain one?
No.
Well, I'll talk to you after.
Okay,
about
yeah.
these books. And I am open for questions now. So please, I do want to, before I take your question, I do want to mention we are now open on Mondays. We are at the Ranch House, Santa Margarita Ranch House on Mondays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We have docents there. This is a first that I know of. We usually only do scheduled tours, which you can still do. So if you have base access and can get on base, come on Mondays. We're going to have a couple of docents there that can talk to you, show you around informally or whatever, or you can schedule a tour. And if you don't have base access, you just have to give yourself a couple of weeks to put your name in. Just email that email address or call the Marines at that phone number, and you can get on base. But we'd love to see you on Mondays if you're able to come on in or schedule a tour. Camp Pendleton. Camp Oh, okay. Question, sir.
Yeah, you were talking about that little village that was kind of squeezed out by.
Oh, yes.
How big was that? How many people were living there at the time?
That's a very good question.
And what happened to the people that were living
A
there?
great
were they
question.
run off the land?
There you go. Yes. It was about, I've read different acreages, but 20,000 acres, which is a lot. The thing is, it doesn't add up to me because the Rancho San Onofrio y Santa Margarita was 89,000 acres. And when it became Rancho Santa Margarita y Las Flores, it's 133,000 acres. So the 20,000 doesn't make that up. So I'm not certain of the acreage, and I've read other numbers too. So let's just kind of go with maybe 20,000 acres. And that is a lot of land. And maybe that's why Pio and Andres wanted it. That is still a lot of land, and we're surrounding it, and we want it. People there at one time in 1838, 39, there were about 32 families living there. And it was so bad that the Picos were doing to them. They sent William Hartnell down to the supervisor of the to help out and figure out what's going on. And it was pretty bad for them. So much that they gave in. Now, where did they go? Some of them went to Paula. Some of them came up to Temecula. And some just worked on the ranch, all the ranchos that were around. And some stayed at Las Flores, though. There were some that still stayed there. The estancia was still standing. The estancia, and they had their own dwellings that they made. So there were still some native people living at Las Flores even after the Picos. They didn't make them leave. Forrester made them leave. Forrester said, "You got to go." So, but they became employees of different ranchos, or they moved here to Temecula or to Paula. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes. Is it true that the government was initially going to give Rancho Santa Margarita back to the O'Neills after the war was over?
The O'Neills did want it back. They offered to rent it. The O'Neills offered to rent it to the government, but they didn't want to lose ownership. So that's the only story that I know on that, is they wanted it back, and the government wasn't giving it back to them. The government paid $4 million for it. But does that go along with what you're kind of a little bit? Yeah. That's all I know about that. Yes, ma'am.
Let's see if I can get this correct. Jane's parents, Jane oldest of
Do you
10.
want me to put the screen back?
It's okay. Yeah, but Jane's mother was related to an Estudillo.
Jane's mother. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Jane's mother. Her mother was Maria Antonia Estudio.
Estudillo.
And yes, and her father was Jose Antonio Estudio and Maria Victoria Dominguez.
Okay, because I portray a lady whose family was up on the Santa Rosa Plateau in the 1880s and 90s. Her grandfather was Don Juan de Bandini, who was married to an Estudillo.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you hear anything in your research that connects to the family that was up here.
Yeah, that family, I know that family. That was Elena Couts.
Right, Elena
Couts married to Deer Parker. And that was Parker Deer, yes.
Yeah.
And her father was Cave Couts and Isadora Bandini Couts. That was her mother.
Yeah.
I do know a little bit about her. She, after the Santa Rosa time, I was a docent at Rancho Wahome for a little while.
Oh, okay.
And when I was there, I had an archaeologist student come through who was doing a project on, Elfin Forest. Is it called Elfin, not Forest, Elfin, the hiking, you know where I'm talking about. Yeah. Elfin Forest. Yes. They had an Adobe over there.
Right.
Yeah. So, and she was doing archaeology on that Adobe that's over in the Elfin Forest. That was Elena Couts Deer. Yeah.
Because her mother, married to Cave Johnson Couts, had quite a strong personality, as you know.
Oh,
But I'm
yes.
having a hard time finding anything about Elena. I don't know if she
So
had
you're
this-
portraying Elena.
Elena Couchdeary, right? And I don't know if she had a strong personality like both her parents, or was she more subdued because she had those? I don't know if you've come across anything in
Yeah,
your research.
my take on her is
about
she
her.
was very strong-willed as well,
As well.
like her mother. Yes.
Yeah.
Have you been to Wahome, Rancho Wahome?
Oh, yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting that you
Yeah.
portray her. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
How long was Cliff May active?
As an architect, builder, designer. Oh, until he was elderly, that I know, because he was not a licensed architect until he became an older man. So that right there tells me that he continued on for him to get licensed as an older gentleman. And I don't know what his age was, but he seemed to continue to stay in that.
I lived in one of his houses in Tustin.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
A lot of glass.
Oh, wow. You may find it. I've got a couple of the books. Sunset Magazine, they loved him. He designed their office building in Northern California. I forget the town that it's in. But this book was an early, and it's got the designs in there. It's got photos of Las Flores and Santa Margarita in here. And this was a second edition. It even has his name at the bottom, Cliff May. So you may see that house in one of these books. So that's interesting. I love the Cliff May connection, especially with it being a National Historic Landmark for its architecture, and he becomes an architect. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, I hope to see you guys. I took it off the screen, but I have flyers back there and pamphlets, so come and see us. We'd love to have you. And I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you.
Shelley Mangram, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
My pleasure.
presentation tonight.